Ladies and gentlemen, today we'll be talking about distribution injustice, in particular epistemic injustice. Now, Miranda Ficker, in a 2007 article, coins it a philosophical framework that deals with the fairness in production, attribution, and recognition of knowledge. Now, much of our modern world, be it products we use or the scientific advances that we take for granted, is built on information derived from indigenous knowledge. Yet, indigenous knowledge, and of course indigenous peoples, have historically faced systematic marginalisation rather than being compensated for the societal contributions. Indigenous knowledge is grounded within its own system of logic, which makes sense within their cultural context and result in valid, fruitful results. A useful analogy can be that of a string, which connects the start to the end through a unique, novel path, but gets there all the same. However, since this path is not the type of scientific, empirical reasoning of controlled experiment, it has historically been dismissed as unscientific and primitive by dominant Western paradigms, a hallmark of colonialism's legacy. Now, a clear example of this is how agricultural practices refined over millennia by indigenous communities were and still continue to be overlooked in favor of industrial farming techniques from Britain's Green Revolution. These provide high immediate yields at the cost of long-term soil depletion and reliance on American and Western Europe monopolized chemical fertilizer products. Farmers in Ethiopia, a country that managed to resist colonialization during the scramble for Africa, have held on to sustainable, resourceful farming practices that their ancestors have used for generations. These include splashing a special concoction made of cow urine as a fungicide, very sustainable. Singling out plant heads that look healthy for the next year's planting before harvesting the rest of the field. There's also a similar technique called kerem, aka setting aside a whole portion of the field for harvest. Let it be. It can continue and life can be reinvigorated into next year's harvest. The cycle of life continues. Also, using physical barriers like cow dung around the field or storage structures to obstruct the rodents, which it's an ecologically based practice that reduces dependence on rodenticides. It's clean. However, most global south countries haven't been this lucky. The UN estimates that 3/4 of crop varieties have been lost from farmers' field over the last century due to the dominance of industrial agriculture over traditional farming practices. In Mexico, for example, 75% of Yucatec Maya farmers are using conventional practices, pressured by exploitative demands to abandon their traditional sustainable methods. Now, another aspect of this epistemic injustice is what Vandana Shiva, the Gandhi of agriculture, calls biopiracy. Indigenous knowledge, rather than being cast away in favor of a sweeping, context-mismatching Western approach, is stolen and reframed as a Western invention. Billions of dollars worth of drugs and commercial products have ingredients derived from traditional plant uses, yet indigenous custodians rarely benefit commensurately. The list of biopiracy incidents is countless. I highly suggest you read the Wikipedia article on it. One prominent example is that of neem, a tree from the arid areas of India that was long used by native peoples for uses ranging from medicine, toiletries, contraception, timber, fuel, and agriculture. Now, access to neem's various products have historically been cheap or even free. So functionally, it's a common resource. This status quo changed in the 1970s. When American timber importer Robert Larson monopolized the tree's pesticidal properties through an EPA-cleared patent, the government's involved, and then sold it onto corporate titan W.R. Grace. Damn you, W.R. Grace. You shall repent. A stem of this injustice is the incompatibility of indigenous knowledge with contemporary patenting legislation, since the knowledge is communally held and intergenerational rather than a single person's idea. It represents a paradigm where information is free to be shared, whereas our paradigm is based on the virtue of greed, where information is competitively hoarded and motivated by individual financial gain rather than, the well-being of one community. This aspect of openness is what has made Indigenous knowledge so exploitable in the past. It bears no single guardian that's well versed in the Western legalese that can fight tooth and nail to protect it. So, what can be done? Well, the article I cited the most in researching this topic, written by Jerski Jazin and Duria Wesleyan at the University of the Philippines, created a pretty comprehensive list. Numero uno, monetary returns. Fair shares of profit or royalties from commercialized Indigenous knowledge should be given to the communities that born it. 2, capacity building. So shares of this profit can also be invested into community-driven training, infrastructural development, or educational opportunities. 3, intellectual property co-ownership. This involves formally registering the Indigenous community alongside the external entities, such as the company or the researcher, as co-owners of the resulting intellectual property. 4, return of research materials. So data, samples, and findings should be returned to the community if accessible. Should be returned to the community in accessible, culturally appropriate formats. Echoing off the previous point, external research organizations should give logistical support for research priorities of the Indigenous communities themselves, as opposed to their own corporate academic goals. And lastly, influence on policy. Governments should ensure that Indigenous voices shape the policy related to their knowledge and resources. Hey, it's only fair. This list provides a positive direction that can mitigate this kind of distribution injustice that I hope you have learned about today. Now, keep informed on this topic. It's truly eye-opening. Inea Santana, over and out.